Good afternoon.
Hello.
Kevin, do you want to test your audio?
That doesn't look like Kevin.
Oh,
This is Jim
Kevin
Armstrong.
replacement?
Kevin should come on too, I think.
Did he share his panelist invite with you?
Yeah, I think he did.
You can change the name on your screen.
Yep, I'm going to do that right now.
Is my video coming in okay?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. I know I've been having some issues the last couple meetings. I don't know.
Welcome, Joanna.
Hi, Cindy. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Steph, did you get your script?
I did. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay.
So it's turning to 1:30. Let's give it one more minute for Anna or Council Member Chouteau to show up, and then we'll get rolling. We'll wait till 1:31 if she's here. Regardless, we'll get moving. We have a quorum.
Let me just reach out real quick.
If I tried to block out 90 minutes, but as things have evolved, I have a hard stop at 2:30, just so you
Okay,
know.
I think we can move pretty crisply along here. I'm seeing Anna coming on. So if Cindy, are we ready to get rolling?
We are.
Very good. So this is the City of St. Helena Special City Council meeting, Friday, March 25th, 2022. This is with our amended agenda. Cindy, could you give us the remote instructions, please?
Certainly. I share my screen. Okay, for the public to participate by phone, they can dial 669-900-6833 at the prompt you to enter the meeting ID, which is 811-2574-9488. You would press pound, and then during public comment, you would press *9 to speak.
Thank you. And we do also have Spanish language interpretation services. If people want to reach out ahead of time, 72 hours, we can arrange that. And so with that, we've done our remote instructions. We'll do our roll call, please.
Mayor Ellsworth,
Here.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Here.
Councilmember Chouteau,
Here.
Hall,
Here.
Hardy.
Here.
Thank you. And it's not on the agenda, but I am going to do the pledge. So if folks would mute your microphones and follow with me, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And then we'll move now to our adoption of the agenda. Have there been any changes to the agenda?
None.
None. So we'll look for a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
And a second, please.
Second,
Councilmember Chouteau,
Yes.
Hardy,
yes.
Paul,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth.
Yes. Public comment, under California law, public comments at special meetings are limited to subjects on the agenda only. Therefore, public comment will take place during consideration of the item. Each person's comment should be limited to 4 minutes. These will come up when we get to the items. We'll move to the consent calendar. This is an item that I pulled. This is item 5.1, consideration of a request from Council Member Chouteau approving a resolution authorizing the Ukrainian flag to be flown on the ceremonial flagpole. Well, this is certainly an idea that I support. I think there's a process issue that I'll take responsibility for. I wanted to see if Council Member Chouteau would be amenable to, in terms of the process, putting in a written request and having this show up at our next regular council meeting. I think it's still timely that way, but it would then go through the process that we have in our laid out in the staff report. I'm seeing Councilmember Chouteau.
Yes, I already did that process. I put it in writing and it went to staff. And then we decided to get it up on this agenda because I did the process of having it be in writing, and we wanted to get it up because we're going to be, well, one, because the conflict's going on right now. City of Napa and Yountville already has theirs up. We can raise awareness for a community-wide event that's happening on May 3rd. That's for fundraising. So there's actual action tied to the symbolic gesture. So that's really the sense of urgency, if that makes sense to you, Mayor.
Okay, and I'm seeing our city clerk.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, the staff report that was attached to the agenda does include the formal request in writing to the city manager from Councilmember Chouteau, along with the resolution and your policy.
Okay, well, that may have been something that I had missed in seeing. So with that, I'm okay moving forward then, if we'd like to. I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy.
Thank you. I'm just going to throw out some brief comments at this time. I'm looking at a piece written by Ilya Butritskas recently on the situation in Ukraine. And part of his statement is that we should understand that Putin is not an anomaly, but part of a global market society dominated by market interests. I think the most important thing for everyone to keep in mind in confronting the crisis in Ukraine is that thinking about what's happening with Putin and Russia, things are not so different here as we might wish to believe. If we don't keep that in mind, then we're probably missing the most important lesson that Ukraine presents us. Thank you.
Thank you. And as I'm looking at this request, what I'm seeing, or what I'm hoping maybe we can get from Ms. Chouteau, Member Chouteau, is this as it states in the staff report, in terms of process, looking to make sure that there's a time frame, which we can discuss today, but also that in the request that how display of the flag would relate to a prior or proposed official action, ceremonial item, or proclamation, just so that there's a little more context, and perhaps we can move forward. But if you could provide that just so it's part of the request as we go, and then today we can determine a time frame.
Yes, although I'm not quite understanding what you mean, because when I've seen the past request to how I put it in writing, and it was very similar. And then I
Okay.
worked with our city staff. So I don't quite understand what you
Let
mean.
me add a little bit of insight here. Under our policy, under section 4, there it provides how the request is supposed to be made. It says the request shall specify the type of flag. So we have that. How display of the flag will relate to a prior or proposed official action, ceremonial item, or proclamation of the city council. So it has to be connected to something that we're doing in the city. You mentioned something and maybe there's more to it that you'd want to explain. Then the last thing is the proposed time and manner of the display. I think we can resolve that. I just want to let folks know that we went through a process of developing these protocols to keep it tight so that we had some control over what flags will be raised on our ceremonial pole. Some could be deemed offensive, and we wanted to not set bad precedent by just kind of doing it. So that's the one thing, this B section here. And I think you mentioned that, it just wasn't in the request. So yeah.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. That's helpful. And I do think this is a unique situation because so many people in our community are following in the news and feeling horrible about what's happening in Ukraine and wanting to help the people who are there and showing a big gesture. And they're donating in our community to lots of different organizations in St. Helena. Just our citizens are doing this. There hasn't been one event, but I think our community is really looking for something. And what I've researched and I know about, there's a Napa wide event that's happening that actually the city of Napa is sponsoring on May 3rd. That's going to be a community-wide effort to raise funds for Ukraine. So that's why I wanted to get this up as soon as possible so that we can raise awareness of that as well with this symbolic gesture of raising the flag. And the city of Napa has raised a flag, as has Yountville.
Thank you. I'm seeing Council Member Hardy.
Yes, I have a question for Council Member Chouteau, and that is, will you be proposing then a resolution or proclamation related to the upcoming event in Napa?
If that's what this council wants, yes, I will do that.
It seems to me that if it is clear today that that is forthcoming, then we can proceed consistent with the adopted policy.
Okay.
Thank you. I think
That's
that
fine.
frames it pretty well. So, and then I'm seeing Councilmember Hall, and then we'll take public comment.
Thank you. I would just like to remind the council that in October, we approved raising the POW MIA flag to be flown on the non-ceremonial pole. It's still not up. The city's not paying for the flag. The organizations that wanted to raise the flag are paying for the flag. So I'm not sure what our policy is here, but it would be great to figure out what's happening with our flag poles. How are we doing this? And how do we get a flag raised?
Thank you, Councilmember Hall, and that is something I will follow up on with staff, and we'll make sure we get clarity and get things moving. Thank you. Any additional council comment before I open public comment? We'll go then to public comment.
There are no raised hands.
Okay, we'll bring it back to council. And then, so the one thing to be decided today is a time length. Councilmember Chouteau, do you have a suggestion for how we might move forward with that?
Yes, I was going to suggest doing it until we usually have the rainbow flag flies in June 1st.
I would support that.
Fine.
So it looks like we've got support for that. And Councilmember Hall, I will follow through on the POW MIA flag so that we can see where we are with that in conjunction as this moves forward. So with that, I would look for a motion on the recommended action.
Get direction, I think, Mr. Mayor.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So we, staff, do you have direction, Cindy, on what we want to do here?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you. And certainly I know that this is something we want to be supportive of. So thank you for bringing it to the council.
Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you for being supportive.
I need it.
Oh,
And then I'll need a motion to adopt the resolution.
I move we adopt the resolution to raise
Second.
the Ukraine flag from as soon as we can get it up until June 1st.
Staff should be able to get it up on Monday.
Thank you.
Wow.
So with that, Council Member Chouteau,
Yes.
Hardy,
Yes.
Paul,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth.
yes. Very well. Thank you, everybody. And now we'll proceed to item 6.1. This is consideration and recommended approval of the resolution approving a professional services agreement with Raftelis Financial Consultants to provide services associated with a water and wastewater rate study for a total not to exceed the amount of $146,310 and a budget increase to 561-43-00-21-45 in the amount of $73,155 utilizing water enterprise fund balance and a budget increase to 571.43-00-21-45 in the amount of $73,155 utilizing wastewater enterprise fund balance and provide preliminary direction on rate study approach. And I'm seeing Dr. Mitz or Ms. Kellogg, are you going to lead us into this?
So I will go ahead and lead the conversation for this today, and City Clerk Shapopoulos will be sharing her screen. So in front of you today are actually two different items, and I do want to thank the City Council for being willing to have a special meeting on such short notice after the council meeting. I also want to thank members of the public who hung in there through the council meeting last Tuesday night for this item to be continued, as well as thank our consultants for being on the meeting on Tuesday night, as well as being here today. We do have both Kevin and Jim from Raftelis here. They can answer any specific questions regarding the proposal itself as a response to the RFP, as well as answer any questions for some of the follow-up discussion items for City Council. So next slide, please. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of background, and more details to this are provided in the staff report. The last rate review the city participated in was in 2016. The last rate adoption was 2017, and it was for a 5-year period, which is very typical for a rate structure. The current water rate structure includes fixed monthly charges, which account for about 40% of the revenues, and variable use charges, which account for approximately 60% of the revenues. And they also do include drought rates, as well as peak versus non-peak. And I inadvertently left the peak versus not peak off the slide. Our current wastewater rate structure does include fixed monthly charges, and those are based on meter size, so going anywhere from 1 inch up to a 6-inch meter. And the variable use charges is based on typical flow and characteristics of each customer type. For residential, which also includes multifamily and mobile homes, the wastewater use rate is based off a winter average. And for all other categories, it is based on actual water use per billing. So if you use 10 units of water, you get billed for 10 units of wastewater. Next slide. As far as the process for the rate study proposals, the city did issue an RFP, or a request for proposal, on December 3rd. The RFP process closed on January 21st, and the city did receive 8 proposals. Next slide. From there, what we did is we did have a review committee, and that review committee consisted of 2 council members, which are part of the Water Ad Hoc Committee, 2 staff members, and 1 member of the public. And what the review committee did was they completed an initial individual review of all 8 consultants. So this was conducted independently. The review committee then met to review all proposals, and then they also made the recommendation for the top 3 firms to interview. The review committee did interview the top 3 firms. Following that initial interview, the committee met with our city attorney and our Proposition 218 attorney to further review and discuss the qualifications of the top 3 firms. In particular, we just wanted to make sure any rate structure going forward and any firm that we worked with would maintain compliance with Proposition 218 requirements. And all 3 firms did meet that requirement. The review committee then met to further discuss and solidify the recommended rate consultant. And following that, the review committee did make the recommendation to utilize Raftelis. And after that, staff did work with Raftelis for the final contract amount. So the next slide. So the council action on this particular item today is approval of a professional services agreement with Raftelis Financial Consultants to provide the services associated with the water and wastewater rate study. And it's for a total not to exceed amount of $146,310. And as stated in the introduction from Mayor Ellsworth, it also is approval of a budget increase and use of water and wastewater fund balance to account for this contract. So that's the first item in front of council today. And then the next section is primarily going with some initial direction that staff is looking for council as far as how the rate study is going to proceed. So I don't know if city council would like to take public comment on the first item right now and then shift over to the council direction, or if you'd rather do everything at the end. And I will look to Mayor Ellsworth for that.
I think on this issue, because public comment may help inform the council discussion, let's see. So let me hear how you're doing this again, Dr. Mitz. You want to break it up in the second section is specifically about direction?
Correct. So I didn't know if it'd be cleaner to take public comment just on the contract itself. And then if council would like to vote on the contract itself, and then the next section would be actually seeking council feedback and direction, and also taking public comment regarding the specific council feedback and direction. Or we can wrap it all up at the very end.
My thought now, and I do want to look to Council Member Hardy for his thoughts on how to best structure this, is to get into the conversation and do the public comment all together, at one time. Council Member Hardy, we've been working together on this. What are your thoughts in terms of best process here?
Well, I think in part, in order to make the public comments more meaningful, it would be best if we discuss the items listed in the staff report as subjects for direction from the council, then open it up for public comment, and then close our discussion and take our action.
Okay, very good. We'll do it that way then. And so, Dr. Mitz, do you want to keep moving us forward here?
Yes, I can. Thank you for the feedback. I just didn't know how council would want to handle this one. So next slide, please, Cindy. So right now, we do want to get some preliminary council direction regarding the rate study itself. And again, we do have both Kevin and Jim here who can answer any questions regarding specific types of rate structures. It is also important to note that the list that we included in the staff report, as well as the PowerPoint presentation, is not an exhaustive list. If there's another idea council has today, definitely bring that forward. We also want to point out that any recommended study approaches, they will be fully vetted through the rate consultants, as well as the city attorney and the Prop 218 attorney through BB&K, just to make sure that it is in compliance with Prop 218. And then as we go through the process of the utility rate study, there may be additional costs incurred due to any changes in scope of work as a result of city council direction and/or decisions or additions made during the progression of the rate study. So I did want to throw those caveats out. So the 4 items that we will be looking at today, keep saying tonight, is does council have an interest in development of a tiered water structure, exploring different rate structures based on location, and I'll go into that a little bit more in the next section, amending the consultant's initial task to potentially include a preliminary report regarding different rate structure options, and then also if there is interest in the formation of an advisory committee. So the next slide, please, Cindy. So this is the first bullet pointed item, which is interest in development of a tiered water structure. And so I'd like to solicit council feedback on this item at this point.
So my thought here is if the consultant's available to just give us a very brief summary of sort of the availability of something like this, it might help inform the council in terms of how we discuss something very brief, if that's possible.
Sure. Thanks, Mayor Ellsworth and City Council. This is Kevin Costa from Raftelis. So developing tiered rates is pretty standard for us. Tiered rates in California are ubiquitous, particularly among residential users, and you're obviously a heavily residential community. So I would say in almost all or all of our rate studies, we at least evaluate what tiered rates would look like for your community.
Thank you. So with that, we'll bring it back to council, and we've certainly heard from community members on this as well. Is there any initial council comment here on this aspect? I'm seeing Council Member Chouteau.
I'm interested in it after hearing that comment. I was just curious if anybody could answer why we didn't do tiered rates or have that discussion the last time.
That was part of the discussion, and there was some, in a sense, in my opinion, a bit of lack of clarity, probably due to the proximity to the Prop 218 Capistrano case. So it was certainly discussed at the last rate setting, and it didn't go that way. But now, revisiting it, we want to look in, and I would certainly like to look into that, those options.
Okay.
Is the way we're doing it currently illegal?
Mr. Kostiak?
Well, so saying illegal is a legal determination, so I'm not going to answer yes or no, but I'll just say that there are a number of agencies that have uniform rates, whether that's uniform for a class, uniform for the entire service area. Effectively, what you're saying is you have a commodity rate that's kind of averaged across all user types. So no, it's common. But tiered rates, again, particularly among residential users, are more common in California.
Thank you.
Any other council comments in terms of support on this?
Just one little thought here. It's somewhat, in my mind, at least related. Tiered rates is sort of a broad terminology, but I'm wondering, is there a potential also within this, at least this general discussion on this issue, whether we can look at a specific rates for our contracted water users as sort of a separate class, and whether 218 is even implicated for contract users. And I want to throw that out there as a point of discussion. I'm not sure if I have not fully vetted it in my brain, but whether there are other cities, for example, that they may sell water to another district or another entity. Is there a specialized fee or something associated with those who are contracted as opposed to those who just automatically receive water through our rate system?
Yeah, so anytime we have a contract, that's just the agreement between the parties. That does take it outside of Prop 218. So it's not like our retail water service. When we're talking about either wholesale water provided by the city or contract customers, then yes, there's a difference there, and outside of 218.
Thank you. I'm seeing Council Member Hardy.
Yes, I would just want to share the observation that, to the best of my knowledge, the current contracts all provide that the customer will pay our ordinary rates except under certain circumstances. So I'm pretty sure that in order to do something different, the customer would have to agree to an amended or revised contract.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hardy. But the point I'm making is that the question I'm asking is whether contract rates can be deemed the ordinary rates for those who have a contract and therefore have to pay those because it's part of the ordinary system. It's incorporated into our rates.
It strikes me that this, perhaps getting deeper into this, if there's a will or an interest in getting into it, it's looking to our consultant as we go through this work, where that could perhaps be broken down and clarified. Mr. Kostiak, yes.
Yeah, that's something we could certainly advise as we get through the study.
Okay, so it looks like we do have consensus on looking to tiered rates. So Dr. Mitz, if we can move through this a little bit.
Thank you.
Are we going to go one bullet at a time, or do you want to run through the bullets and talk about what they mean and what they are, and then go back through them, or what are we doing?
My intention was to run through each of the because there's 4 different bullet points, and one of the bullet points has several different sub features. So I would like to run through each of them and then get initial council feedback, and then we can open it up for public comment at the end, and then get final council direction.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Cindy, if you can share your screen again. So the next slide is to see if council has interest in exploring. If you can go to the next slide, Cindy. I'll start talking in 1 moment. Slides. Okay, so the next one is interest from the council in exploring different rate structures based on location. So there are 5 different components of this that we can potentially look at. The first is rate surcharges for customers and locations that require pumping, which will benefit a defined area. The second is source-based tiered rates. The third is a peaking factor tiered rate. The fourth is distance-based tiered rates. And then the fifth is a location-based tiered rates. Location is primarily referring to both in-town customers versus out-of-town customers. In particular, I know the idea had been brought up before with the GO bond measure is that if it's feasible to potentially charge out-of-town customers, and out-of-town customers we only have on the water side, we have no sewer out-of-town customers. If there's an additional charge that that can be presented to them, if because they don't pay property taxes that would be associated with a GO bond. So those are the 5 different things, and so we'd love to get council feedback, as well as have any additional clarification provided by Kevin if council has any questions on any of these items.
Thank you. If there's, I wanted to see from Mr. Kostiak just a little overview here. Can all of these be looked together comprehensively and in a sense woven together to something that works for our community?
Yes, and maybe I'm going to go kind of easy to hard here. So, and out of order, peaking factor rate tiers. So if we're evaluating tiered rates, that's just something that's going to be baked in. Where when we develop tiers, we're looking at how the demand patterns change between classes and between tiers, and that's primarily driven by peak demands. Second one would be source-based rates. So really what we're saying is you have 3 sources of supply. They have different costs to them. And if we have a tiered rate structure, should we be differentiating from kind of low, medium, and high so that we make sure that the lowest cost water is received, that benefit is received in the lowest tier, rather than averaging those source costs. So those are the 2 that kind of are baked into, we'll call them our rate components within a tiered rate. Distance-based rates, I don't know if I've ever seen this. I know at least adopted. I think there have been some agencies that have evaluated it, but what you get into is charging rates based on either the blessing or the curse of geography, and trying to identify, how far you are from certain facilities in the system. And, you might be further from a treatment facility or production wells, but you might be closer to storage. So, I don't know any agency that's actually implemented distance-based rates. The location-based, so if we're talking inside, outside city, what we want to do is make sure that we have a strong rationale and something that ties to, we need a nexus with the costs incurred by the utility of serving outside city customers, rather than something that says we're trying to recover effectively general benefit costs that inside city customers pay for, that we're attempting to recover from outside city. So we need a really strong basis that's cost driven to define any differences inside outside city. The last one, and then the last one, if I could, that first bullet, yes. Surcharges for customers that require pumping. So that's commonly referred to as elevation surcharges. Fairly common, but there's a policy decision to be made if there are real costs incurred to move water up elevation. Water is heavy, electricity is expensive to move water to higher zones, but it may be that customers in lower zones are benefiting from having water stored at higher elevations for things like firefighting, or we may have water sources coming in as raw water from higher zones to lower zones that need to be then lifted once more. So we need to get into the kind of details and see, is the trade-off worth it? And is it appropriate to go charge customers in higher elevations for those costs?
Thank you. And a question I did have is, in terms of looking at commercial industrial use, can that be combined into the tiered rate discussion and structure?
Yeah, commercial and industrial almost always is a uniform rate, just because there's a variety, or there's such wide variation in water use. You may have a small office or a small cafe versus an industrial user that's using quite a lot of water. So they're most commonly uniform. There are agencies that do it more of a two-tier, which would be looking at historical use. And so you would say a connection's historical use would represent their base allocation, or you could think of that as their tier 1. And if they exceed that historical amount, that would be tier 2. And so it's really looking at an efficiency type basis. So that is kind of the next most common, I'd say. And then there's a school of thought that if you have tiered rates for residential, then maybe you should have them for commercial, and you could kind of define them similarly how you define your residential rates. But I think that's still kind of a philosophy, and I haven't seen that implemented much across the state.
Okay, thank you. Any council input here? And I do think we do want to keep things concise and moving. But any thoughts here in terms of support here, looking in these areas?
Kevin, can you talk?
I'm sorry, Councilmember Hall, if you could put a hand up, it's easier for me to organize the conversation.
Oh, okay.
And Councilmember Hall, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin, can you please rehash the source-based again?
Sure. So source-based meaning that we have multiple sources of supply, and those supplies we have in different quantities, and they generally have different costs, and those costs might be wildly different. So work with agencies that may have very inexpensive groundwater and very expensive imported water. And so what we're saying is when we develop tiered rates, we're differentiating the tiers in part by going low, medium, high with those source costs, rather than saying these are our supply costs all in, and we're just going to average them across the.
And the assumption is that internally within the system, those sources are kept somewhat separate by end user?
Not exactly. It's more that we only incur those higher source costs to serve larger demands, those that fall in the higher tiers. And so you could think of it perhaps as if, a common example, if everybody was a tier 1 user, maybe we'd only need local groundwater. Or for in your case, your local surface water. And then as demand increases and you have demand in the higher tiers, that requires you to invest in or purchase more expensive sources of supply.
Thank you. And so I guess the issue is how you determine costs there of the source, right? If, for instance, you have a very cheap source in groundwater, but you're regularly fighting lawsuits about that, is that part of the cost?
If we can identify those within your budgets and your cost structure, and we know where they are and to allocate them to those supplies, then sure, I don't see any issue with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm seeing Council Member or Vice Mayor Doring.
I just wanted a little bit of clarification on this concept of source. are you suggesting that the ratepayer, depending on what source of water that they receive, would have a different would receive a different fee? And if so, I think we really need to explore that from an engineering standpoint, and the whole community needs to know what that is. Maybe I'm misunderstanding the concept.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's at the individual user. Think of it as a class. So we're going to look at a class of users.
Classes, yes.
Yeah, the class of users as residential. We're going to define tiers for that class. And if you have 3 tiers, everybody has to go through tier 1 before they get to tier 2. Everybody has to go through tier 2 before they get to tier 3. So you're defining these costs, these tiers at the class level.
I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy.
I just had
Oh,
one.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Mr. Doring, Councilmember or Vice Mayor, please.
On this issue, I think we have to have a really good communication with our staff and with the public in terms of, we may have all the greatest ideas in the world, but if they're not easily implementable or they require maybe more cost than it's worth in terms of generating the fees that are produced as a result, we have to really balance those two. And I mean, that's always been an issue in our city. So I'll just add that. Thank you, Councilman Hardy, go ahead.
I just had a follow-up question for Mr. Kosik. If I understand the concept correctly, the source-based costs would be tiered according to the aggregate volume of use for the class. So that, if you establish from the records as an example that residential customers account for 100 acre feet of the water consumed from the municipal wells and 500 acre feet of the water consumed from or delivered from Bell Canyon, and some additional 300 acre feet, say, for the water from Napa, then the tiers would be based on cost, and everyone would pay the lower cost until their proportional allocation, not a term I really like here, but we'll call it that, allocation of the low cost water is used. Then they're in the next tier and so on. Is that how it works?
Yeah, that I think that's a good explanation. We're going to go through this cost allocation, and we're going to allocate those source costs and source volumes first at the class level, and then where we have tiered rates, then within the tiers, so that the tiers themselves are cost based.
So the net result, if I understand it correctly, is that the lowest volume users in any class get the benefit of the least expensive source, and the highest volume users, while they may start up to some amount in the low tier and the medium tier, will be taking on the cost of much or all of our most expensive water. Is that correct?
That's fair.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so with that, is there council support in terms of looking at this and keeping this part of what we're doing? Thus far, I've just heard questions. Councilmember Hardy?
Oh, yes. Well, for me, the key to this is the process-related bullet point that's in the staff report. I think what makes the most sense is to modify task 1 so that we have at a regularly scheduled public meeting preliminary assessment from the consultants as to the viability or desirability of each of these possibilities, so that consistent with Vice Mayor Doring's concerns, there's an opportunity and a way of more completely informing the public, getting those comments before we give our final direction to the consultants on what the council is looking for in terms of rate structure. So for me, those two things are linked. I'm fine with having all of these things considered. I think tiered rates are going to make sense, but I want to be sure that we have a process that more fully informs the public and more fully informs us, not only as to this whole complex subject of tier rates, but also as to the public response. Thank you.
Thank you. And I saw Councilmember Hall with a hand up and I see it down now. So, okay, thank you. The third factor then is looking at the interest in having the consultant's initial task amended to include a preliminary report regarding different rate structures of interest to the city council and attendance at one city council meeting to discuss the recommendations. Dr. Mitz, I apologize. I think I just jumped on your lines there.
No, you are good. And I figured, Cindy, I just share the screen. So this is what Councilmember Hardy had just mentioned, is interest in amending the consultant's initial task to include a preliminary report, which basically would go into further explanation, a little more details into all the various types of rate structures that we could potentially look at to really for council to make a determination on what's best for the community. This would include a city council meeting to discuss any recommendations. So this, if there, and again, at the very end, we can take final direction from City Council. If there's interest in doing this, what we would do is we could still move forward with adopting, with approving the professional services agreement with Raftelis. And what we would do is we'd bring back a contract amendment at a separate meeting to be able to include this one other City Council item. So with that, I would open it up for direction and discussion from Council.
Yes, so I think that how Councilmember Hardy framed it is certainly something I'm supportive of, that this comes back in a sense as a package. The one point that we had not talked about yet was the final bullet point. Dr. Mitz, do you want to wrap that into the discussion here and see if we have concurrence that bringing back this as a package?
Perfect. Yeah, so the final point you're talking about is the Water Advisory Committee. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth? So
yes.
The last item is interest. If there's interest in the formation of a Water Advisory Committee, we have had this in the past in the last rate study. It is not mandatory, but we did want to get council feedback and direction. If they do want to invoke an advisory committee, the committee would be there to provide feedback on the draft rate study prior to the final decision by City Council and prior to going through the Prop 218 process. And then also a determination is whether the advisory committee meetings should be included in the 3 meetings identified in task 9 of the proposal, or do we want to make that as a separate additional task, which would require a contract amendment?
Thank you. And I'm seeing Councilmember Chouteau.
Thank you. I think the advisory committee is a good idea. And if we can include them in the work already, that's great, because I assume that saves us money and time.
And I'll look to the consultant, Mr. Kostiak. This is something that you can fold in.
Yeah, we had discussion with staff about folding in any committee tasks as part of our other tasks, so that when we find ourselves in St. Helena with you all for workshops, that we would have meetings with that commission if we move forward with it.
Thank you. Any other council comment here? I have a few thoughts, but want to see if anybody else. I'm seeing Vice Mayor Doring.
Yeah, just this is unrelated, not directly related, but there's been some talk in the community about the potential for a water commission, more of a long-term commission to look at our utilities, how they operate, those kinds of things. I just, for the public's interest, I'm interested in that, and that's for another day. That topic's not directly on our agenda tonight, today. But one of my concerns is that there may be some overlap in interest on a potential citizens advisory committee for the rates study and this other commission. And I'd hate to drain citizen resources to put on one and not the other. So I think they should be separated by time to a certain degree, but keep that option open. And maybe this advisory committee could be morphed into that commission later down the road. So I just offer that for the council's consideration, not directly part of our discussion, but that's why there's a concern that I've been sort of holding off on that making any recommendations on the commission, because I think we need to get really smart people on this committee first to do the work that's, and this is complex. This little town is creating a lot of complex issues for the consultant. This is not cookie cutter stuff, I hope. It's really specific to our community. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm supportive of that, looking at that staggered approach between a committee for this rate study and then a longer term commission. And I appreciate you bringing that up. Any other council comment here in terms of support? I'm certainly supportive of this. And so I believe we have some direction from 3 of the council members. So if we look at that now as having worked through those with this idea that a package comes back, are we at the point now where, I'm saying Dr. Mitz?
I was just going to do a reminder for public comment. I want to make sure that we give them the opportunity as well.
That's where I wanted to see now if we opened for public comment.
There's a hand raised. Kelly, I'm going to unmute you and you can address the council.
Good afternoon, Mayor Ellsworth, City Council staff and City Council members and representatives of Raftelis. I was really excited to hear Paul and Mayor speaking about the need for maybe a long-term water commission, and that this rate study might morph into something that provides a longer permanent oversight of our water and wastewater. I was excited in Raftelis's, I read through your descriptions, and you said task 1 is to get public input and engagement will be sought at the initial stage. And so I'm wondering what that would look like. I want to speak in support of having an advisory committee. I want to know how the various different stakeholders are going to be represented in terms of people within the community and people outside of the city limits, people who are residential versus commercial users. And I also wanted to speak to my interest in the rate surcharges that were described as elevation surcharges. I mean, when we're really getting into the nitty-gritty of costs that are above, for instance, we live about a mile south of town on the flat, and supplying water to us, I think, would be far different than supplying it to Meadowood, not to mention the amounts that would be using by residential customers versus commercial customers. And my final point, and I made this at earlier council meetings, is I felt that during the phase 2 restrictions because of the drought, that the residential customers really took it on the chin, and that it was inequitable in the way that commercial customers only had to reduce by 10%. So I'm putting a really strong plug in for equity across all classes, and that some people don't get a pass just because they're using more water or their commercial entity. Because frankly, if a winery has to spend more money, how much does that add to a bottle of wine? And if you're charging $125 a bottle and it ends up being $126, I don't think that's too big a price for those commercial users when I'm letting my landscaping die. So anyway, thank you very much. I hope that there will be a substantial advisory committee, and thank you for taking my comment.
Thank you for the public comment. We'll look for additional public comment.
Gary, you can unmute yourself and address the council.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to say that I fully support a citizens ad hoc rate structure committee. And I'd like to see that occur as early in the process as possible, especially if you're going to have one of these intermediate reports. I think that that committee would be important even prior to that report. And secondly, I am glad that Mr. Doring brought up a more permanent commission for water and wastewater. And I fully support that as well. I do think it's a good idea to separate the two. The rate study is the number one thing on everyone's mind right now, and I think that needs to be taken care of first. And then we can figure out how to do a water and wastewater citizens committee in a more permanent form. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for the public comments, and we'll see if there's additional public comment.
Nancy, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I just want to applaud the process that's underway at the moment and lend my support to the thinking of evaluating the cost of delivery and other factors that may influence the way water rates are dished out in the future. I think it's, especially with ongoing drought conditions, I think these are critical issues that need to be taken into consideration. So I'm very excited about the idea of changing up the way the water rates have been determined in the past, and also want to say yes to the idea of a committee and then separately a long-term commission in the future, hopefully. I think that would be not only beneficial to the community, but for a city that has got heavy burdens among your staff and boatloads of responsibilities. I think letting members of the community help in ways that support what you're doing would be really great. So thank you for what you're doing, you guys. Bye.
Thank you. And I'll look to our city clerk to see if there's additional public comment.
There is none.
So with that, I'm going to bring it back to the council to see if there's any additional input. I do want to mention that we have Ms. Jin on with us from Best and Krieger, our law firm, who's been engaged, the BB&K, with us through this process to make sure that as we work with a consultant, it remains consistent with our city legal team as well. So we appreciate you being here. With that, I'm seeing Vice Mayor Doring.
Thank you, Mayor. Just earlier today, I was jotting down a few notes and I was just wanting to make sure I have these issues on the table. I'm thinking about this concept of drought surcharges, and it's kind of striking because it's with climate change, it seems to me that it's not sort of the temporary intermittent sort of situation where they come into play, and that maybe we need to kind of rethink that category and that description and maybe the sort of criteria that fall within that category. It seems almost like a more permanent kind of a situation. So it's just food for thought to think, you know, this is something to make just be a continuing sort of situation for us. Phase two, we have phase one, phase two that triggers those according to the staff report. I think that's correct. So just something to think about. And I don't know what other communities are doing. Seems to me like a climate change surcharge, but I don't know if that's defensible. So it's something to think about. The other thing is, I know in past studies, we grappled with the issue of balancing the fixed rate charges versus the variable charges. And I would like to hear at some point, maybe not right at this moment, but you know, I think it's a 40-60 split, if I'm not mistaken. If there's going to be a relook at that, you know, to provide maybe a little bit more stability, especially given climate change and drought surcharges. So I think I have all the issues. I've given you a lot to think about, so I just want to put those on the table for future reference. And I thank you for your work so far.
Thank you. And I do, the idea of being nimble in these times that are different times with climate change, et cetera, working with a consultant who's been through this with us, actually, frankly, over the drought that we've been through. So I think that's important to keep in terms of consideration. Any other council comment at this point, or interest in the recommended action? I'm seeing Councilmember Chouteau.
Yeah, I'm interested in the recommended action, everything except I would be comfortable taking out the distance one, since we heard that no other community has used that.
My thought would be to at least keep it in what we're looking at, not necessarily using it, but it may inform the larger conversation, even if it's something we don't include. That's my thought, just to keep the whole lens open. Councilmember Hardy, any thoughts in terms of that?
Well, I don't see any harm in including it, even if that really only means that everyone has another opportunity to hear what we've heard today with respect to that approach. It has been a subject in which some citizens have had a considerable interest in the past. The thing that I feel is most important for the process is that we demonstrate in concrete terms that we've really taken the time and trouble to inform ourselves as to a full range of options. The list that's in the staff report reflects the effort that went in at committee level to do just that. And things that we learned from our interviews of all of the consultants who were interviewed. So I don't see any need to change things in terms of what we're doing right now.
So with that, is there any other council input? And I'll entertain a motion on the recommended action if there's no other additional comment or question.
I move we approve the contract.
I'll second.
Councilmember Hardy,
Yes.
Chouteau,
Yes.
Paul,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth.
Yes. Well, thank you, everybody, for the focus on this. Mr. Kostiak and Mr. Armstrong, thank you for being here and really helping us with this, and our staff as well for the work, and Ms. Jin from BB&K for being here. Everybody, thank you for accepting this special meeting so we could get this accomplished. So if there's nothing else additionally, we will see you at the next meeting.
Good timing for Mr. Hardy.
Bye, everyone.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.